I was born in a country that no longer exists, the Soviet Republic of Latvia. I was born in a typical Soviet family, in a town just a couple of kilometers away from the capital, a small town that developed around a textile factory that produced clothes for the entire Soviet Union. It employed the majority of the town population, including my family. A typical Soviet family living in a tiny apartment in a panel house building where you can hear your neighbors sneeze. A tiny Soviet family. Although I did have Lenin and Kremlin on my ABC, I was only a preschooler when the world of my parents and my grandparents just kept crushing down. So I did not have much first-hand experience with the Soviets, but its ideology, its values, and especially so everything that it brought out as it came crushing down had a profound impact on the forming of me as a person. I attribute 3 character traits to that period and to my family. The first is my attitude towards work. I learned it from my grandmother. My grandma is one of the most hardworking, self-disciplined, and determined people I've ever met. This woman, even in her late 80s, she's still working hard in the garden, pickling vegetables like a typical, stereotypical Eastern babushka. And she's really, really good at it. My grandmother was born on a farm, so she was never afraid to get her hands dirty or to do the hard work. Very early, a single mom, she also learned that she had to provide not only for herself, but also for her son, my father. My grandma worked her entire life until the very last day before she retired, and she talks about it with a lot of pride. Sometimes I go and ask her, Babushka, but how do you do it? And she tells me, well, what do you expect? Did you know I was a chief of seamstresses at a factory? It's a badge of honor. My grandmother taught me that to be applying yourself at work, to be hardworking, is not only a way to be a contributing and a respectable member of society. It was also a source of self-worth, self-validation, and identity. The second thing I learned from my parents was to be ambitious. And that I got from my dad. When he was a little boy, he used to sneak into his grandfather's farm where the Soviet radio jamming equipment couldn't reach and tune into BBC and listen to the news in English and vibe with the corrupt Western music. Because my father knew already then he wanted something else in his life. He wanted change. And he was not afraid to work for it. He was not afraid to dream and to make it happen. So my dad was one of the first in his family to go to a university. And when an opportunity presented itself, he took an entrepreneurial journey and joined what we would call a startup nowadays. My dad had a dream. He wanted something else for his family, so he worked hard. And within a couple of years, he became the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the country. He took his ambition, and his ambition took us, our little family, from a tiny apartment in a panel house building and provided us with the ability to travel abroad. It gave us an opportunity to go to school like EHL. It gave us an opportunity to be privileged, to do something that he never had the access to. He got it through his ambition. When I asked my mom, when did she really feel that her world had changed? And she said something interesting. She said, you know, it was when, for the first time ever in her life, she felt she had to take responsibility for what happens to her. You see, unlike my dad, who was born in the periphery of the Soviets, in the Western Latvia, yes, it's a matter of perspective, guys, my mom lived in the Soviet Russia. She was born in a family of math and physics professors, and with that, her journey was predefined. You see, in the Soviets, there was not much horizontal or vertical movement. People followed into the steps of their parents. So my mom's true choice of what she was going to do with her life was to either study physics or math. So my mom studied computer engineering, and she got distributed to work in my hometown. What does that mean? Well, in the Soviets, the economy was planned, and so was the society. So they knew if they needed to achieve certain results, they needed X amount of engineers. So they produced the X amount of engineers. And then once they were ready, they just distributed them to the open position. So none of the CV, resume, assessment centers, interview process, none of that. So my mom lived in a lot of certainty, a lot of security. Now fast forward to the 90s, where everything she knew was gone. That safety blanket was gone. She found herself in a newly independent country where the rules of engagement still had to be defined. There was no laws. In a country that had a rather negative attitude towards Russian speakers. In a country where she had 2 little daughters in a risk to getting lost in the vortex of what was happening. So my mom made a decision that it took me a while to understand. She decided to quit her job and to be a caretaker for us. Back then, I was like, Mom, ambitious, working hard, what are you doing? And only when I got older, where I could really comprehend my mom's context, I understood how much courage, how much self-determination and love it took my mom to make the sacrifice and to make sure that my sister and I could grow up in a wholesome and safe environment. So with this, working hard, being ambitious, have a strong sense of accountability and great education, I stepped into the world and I said, world, here I come. And the world looked at me. It's like, sorry, new number, who this? Chewed me up a bit, slapped me around, but otherwise said, all right, well, girl, you give it a go. And I did. I ended up in hospitality tech, IT. An industry I knew almost nothing about, and an industry mostly dominated by men. Well, that didn't scare me, right? I had everything it took to succeed. And so I applied myself. I started as an intern in a consulting company, and after a couple of years, I was already leading a team of consultants. We were working on projects small, big, in Germany, Europe, and across the ocean. I personally negotiated 6-digit numbers for our clients, and I was really, really proud of the progress I was making. Yet ever so often, when we would go to a client meeting with my male intern, they would refer to him most. They would look at him, they would shake his hand and give him feedback on the deliverables, assuming that the roles were reversed. Other times, when I would go to a high-stake presentations with my client, with my boss, super excited to finally present the project I've been working on for months. And the client assumed that I was just the secretary, that I was just there to take notes. I was frustrated, I was annoyed, but shrug it off, and I just work harder to prove them all that they're wrong. And in the decade that followed, these little biases, these little remarks, these little comments, and the decisions that were made about me, without me, all had a similar undertone. This little voice that kept telling me, like, you're just not quite it, not quite good enough. You're not gonna get there. And this really started to get to me. So what did? I did what I knew best. I applied myself fully. So I was working. I was working days, I was working nights, I was working weekends. I disregarded all of my social life, my family, my friends, my partner. I studied hard. Any free time I had, I read the books on the industry. I didn't read any fiction for over a decade. If you look at my home library, it's just filled with books about product management, project management, organizational behavior, organizational structure, user experience design. And I was not naive. I knew I was a young woman trying to make it work in a traditionally male industry. I knew I had to work harder than most. I knew I was young, but I knew that would sort of resolve itself rather quickly once I would get a couple of wrinkles here and there. But I also thought I could help myself and cut my hair short, make it dark, wear glasses with huge frames so I can look a bit more nerdy. I would decide what I would wear, how I would talk. Maybe I wouldn't get so emotional. Maybe I wouldn't laugh so much that people don't say I'm a giggly girl. I tried so hard. I tried so many things, and I kept on trying, and I kept on trying and trying, and I kept on running and running and running until I just ran out of breath and exhausted, desperate. I looked around and I asked myself, what the hell am I running for? Where are these other women who are presumably have been doing the same thing, just a couple of steps ahead of me? Where are female tech founders? Where are other women in senior executive positions? Frustrated with my journey, frustrated with my work, frustrated with my life and with myself. I just had to take a break from it all. And so I did. And I went backpacking for a year. And in that year, I did something that I hadn't been doing at all for the whole decade before. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what I was doing. Spent a lot of time soul-searching. I strengthened my mental and my physical health. And I asked myself challenging questions. I took a lot of time to reply and answer these questions. What is it that I want to do after this? How do I go back? What is success? Am I really successful if I'm also miserable? Is it a success if I don't get to be myself at work? Is my life successful if it only revolves around my work? Unsurprisingly, the answer to all of these questions was a solid no. No, I'm not going back to that anymore. I knew something had to change. So when I came back, I didn't come back as a completely different person. It was still me. It was still me, ambitious and willing to work hard and take full responsibility for what happens to me. And I wanted to make it work in the tech industry. But what I did is I changed my character traits to work better for me, to fit better the purpose. So I still work hard, but I'd like to think that I also work smarter, that I can set better boundaries for myself. That instead of putting full effort in my career, I put as much effort in my mental health and in my physical health. I also understood that if I really wanted to be accountable and responsible for how it happens to me, I had to bring my entire self to work and be myself. And that person is louder, more outspoken. She is demanding, she's challenging, she's annoying sometimes as well. But she's also kinder, she's empathetic, and she's really caring. When it comes to ambition, I have to tell you guys, I came back even stronger. I am more ambitious than I have ever been in my life. Instead of waiting around to find a job that suits my new requirements, I co-founded a startup with my wonderful colleagues in Berlin. I get to decide how my role looks like. So now, not only am I ambitious to make my company grow and succeed, I'm also ambitious to build my career, to thrive, but even more importantly, I am really, really ambitious to create an environment where everybody can come and be themselves. I want to build a culture where people can be vulnerable. And most importantly, I'm ambitious enough to hope that I can be an inspiration to the generations who are just a couple of steps behind me, to show a different kind of leadership, to show a different kind of success. And with that, the generation who is following in my footsteps, I would like to tell you, dare to challenge the pre-existing notions. Dare to define your own version of success. Most importantly, dare to be yourselves, no matter what you decide to do. I thank you, and I wish you a lot of luck, guys. Thank you.